All right, good afternoon or good whatever. I'm not sure what time it is wherever you're watching or joining us from, but hello, welcome back to our weekly interview and performance series. Today we have a very special treat with us. We've got the masterful pianist and composer and educator and organist and international traveler, the great Jean-Yves Jung. Yeah?
Jean-Yves Jung, yes.
Jean-Yves Jung, welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, where do you you're from France? Where in France do you live? Where's home?
I live in the northeast of France, right on the German border, um, like 60 miles north of Strasbourg, if you see where Strasbourg is, yeah. Right.
Well, now, and is that where you grew up, or where were you born?
That's where I grew up. I went to college in different town. I went to Brest, which is furthest west possible, and I was in Paris for a moment, and I moved back there. So I'm living back in the northeast, in Lorraine.
Well, and I'm not even
Region
going to
is
try to
Lorraine.
pronounce that because people will be like, "What are you doing?" So, but for your resume, you've played with countless musicians all over the world. And large name artists, lots of experience playing with wonderful people, lots of different styles of music. So, how did you start playing? Where did music begin for you?
Well, music began at, at the house. I mean, my mom used to play a bit of piano or classical, but she played by ear. I mean, we found out that growing up that yeah, she played by ear. Even though she played some Chopin pieces and Liszt, but she learned them by ear, and she was able to really nail it down. And my grandma was playing as well, so there was always music going on at the house. Um, I was noodling around the piano. I didn't take a lesson per se, as a child. And growing up in my teen years, I played a little bit of bass and sung in like a garage band, a rock band, and all this. I mean, it actually gave me experience to play with other people, because it was still like learning the basic skills of listening of what's going on, and and all that, but still no formal training, or pretty much by ear and not knowing what I was doing, and what were the sound that were produced. And
So, in when you were going to school, were there musical groups? I mean, obviously, you said you didn't have any formal training, but were there other classmates that you could get together and play music with, or were there places where you could go and hear music, or things of that nature?
so it was not so much at school, because unlike here, we don't have music practice at school. We don't have band practice, which is, I think, a fantastic thing in the US. Where you can, if you incline to play music, you join the band and you start learning an instrument, and you start learning how to play and cope with other musicians. In France, it doesn't exist. I mean, we have a music class, a general music class, which is maybe an hour a week, and which is nothing actually, and so it was other friends that did want to play. They were not necessarily in my school or in my class. We just met like somehow, wanted to do music, but I guess I think we were like, yeah, maybe 14, 13, 14. So you don't really know, unless you had some formal training. You don't really know where you're going or what. We just were like, okay, we're gonna make music together.
Well, I mean, obviously, how old are you? You're not that much older than me. I mean, you're
Oh, I'm quite older than you. I'll be 54 this
you're
year.
young. You're young. But I mean, so there was radio, there was television, there were outlets to hear music in that regard. But what about in the town that you grew up in? Were there clubs or things of that nature where you could hear people performing?
So there wasn't any clubs around. It's a small town. I come from a little town in Moselle, which is called Sarreguemines. It's a town right on the border. It's about 30,000 people there. Close by in Germany, there was a few places with concert going on, but I didn't go there until I was 18, because I couldn't drive. I couldn't, in France you start driving at 18, and my parents wouldn't let me go there, and so on and so forth. And also at the time, it was not Europe, so there were some border. You had to go through border, custom, and everything, you know. But I think the first concert that I saw before were maybe like, for example, I saw a Billy Cobham concert when I was 14, which is funny because I saw a Billy Cobham's concert when I was 14 nearby, and it was like, oh, what is that? You know, how can they do that? How can they play like this? You know, and so it was, you know, here and there were some concerts coming nearby, but not like if you live in Paris or where you can go obviously every night and see and hear the right stuff, you know. But
Well, so okay, so you were playing with friends, doing a lot of this stuff by ear, and then from what I understand, you went to university and you were a physics major. You were studying physics.
I studied physics. Yeah, I did a master's of physics, and I liked it, but it was. I mean, it was still my choice, but I came from a scientific family or background, you know, or where my dad was a medical doctor, my grandfather was a chemist, my brother has a PhD in biochemistry, and so on and so forth. So it was a bit like, hey, you have to do science.
So they are they disappointed that you've taken this path as a musician now? I mean, are family gatherings awkward?
No. Hopefully not. No, hopefully not. No.
So you're in school, you're becoming a physicist, and then you decide I'm going to do music. So what spurred this decision? What happened?
I think it was there from the beginning, you know, but I just couldn't either accept it or face it, or, you know, I don't know how to put it together, but I knew I was a musician. Even as a child, I knew I was a musician, or I was meant to do something with music, you know, because every time there was music around, I was like, oh man, this is, you know, this is what is going on there, you know. And during my bachelor, one of the project was to work because I did physics applied to sound and image, and one of the project was like you could actually go work in a studio during the summertime and you know, and write a little essay about this thing and your experience in a studio in a, you know, sound environment, and but of course with a scientific perspective, you know, the waves and so on and so forth, and it was amazing because I got to I was in the studio Davout in Paris, which was a very famous studio where they're recording among other things. They recorded this for the movie Around Midnight, you know.
Tavernier.
Bertrand Tavernier.
Yeah.
So
with
with
Dexter.
with Dexter, Herbie, everybody, they recorded there. It was not the time where I did the thing, but I got to see Michel Legrand, you know, conducting a string orchestra with Hank Jones Trio. And for me, this was like, it was a shock. It was really a shock. I was putting up some microphone and thing, and I was staying in the phone booth, and I was like, I want to be on the other side. I don't want to be doing this thing, and that's what I want to do. And I was still noodling around on the piano. I can't say I started because I told you that before. I started at age 23. I didn't start the piano at 23. I had a piano. I played. I noodled around. But I didn't practice anything. Like, if you ask me, hey, play a D major scale on the piano, I wouldn't have known, you know. But I guess seeing those musicians in this context was already like a giant wake-up call where I felt like, okay, I have to try at least, you know. And I remember also my favorite moment of the day. I spent about a month and a half in this thing during the summertime, and they would let me in. They gave me a key of the studio, and they had a couple of beautiful grand piano. I mean, you can imagine, you know, for this kind of studio. And I would just go and play and try out thing. I mean, it was probably pretty pretty sad at the time, but you know, it kind of sparked this wheel of doing music, you know.
Well, I'm curious, with your background in physics, and then also now your vast experience with music as well. We were doing a workshop yesterday, masterclass, and we were talking with someone, and someone was asking about, you know, how to get someone interested in music. you hear recordings or you might see a video and it can be great and it can spark your interest, but also when you hear it live, you're not just hearing it, but you're also feeling the sound of the vibration of that. So I'm curious, your perspective as someone with a background in physics and the physics of sound and music, what do you think the difference is? I mean, obviously the obvious of feeling that music, but why do you think that has a big pull in influencing people in their frame of minds?
I'm not sure. I would imagine that it's a mix of things. Of course, if you live with other people, it's already just the fact of like a social experiment already. And of course, you feel the music. You can focus on an instrument and get right away to the sound of this instrument when you're there. While when you're watching a video or this on TV or something, you get just a flat sound of everything mixed like it should be. But it's a total different experience. I think it's more the fact of being there and sharing other human beings that are on stage and playing together, and you get exactly you get more emotion out of it than if you just watch it on TV. I would imagine.
Well, so you said, switching gears now, you mentioned Hank Jones and his trio. So when you first started getting serious about jazz and spontaneous composition, who were some musicians that really, for you, and I'm sure, I mean, like most musicians, there's probably a long list at this point now, but when you first, and when you first got started, who were some of you were like, man, I really, really like that?
Okay, I remember, I really remember as a child, my parents had mostly classical music at home. A bunch of LPs, but they did have a few jazz things. They had some Oscar Peterson, some Art Tatum. I mean, like pretty much everybody had, But I mean, and they had some Duke Ellington. Like I remember, a big I don't know how you call this, like with many LPs in it, like a big, with Ellington's orchestral work. And I was, I don't know, maybe 8 or 9, and I remember listening to this thing and being like, what is that? Where is this coming from? Because around the house, mostly, there was classical music, which was great, But I guess as a child, you just wanted to find out, hey, what's going on with this other thing that they never put it on the, I don't know why, not so much. They don't play it so much. Let's try to figure out what this is. And I remember really being drawn by that, and I was, I can't say I was more than 9 years old, So that was one thing. And later on, right at the beginning of, I think I transitioned to jazz. I listened a lot of pop and rock as a teen, and I transitioned listening to some fusion stuff, which I'm not necessarily proud, but but I got to that, through it. I mean, like Chick Corea and Return to Forever and things like this, and Billy Cobham, who I got the chance later on to play and to tour with, And but so I was listening to those things, and then at one point I remember getting some McCoy Tyner super trio with Tony Williams and I don't remember who was, maybe Ron Carter. And the same thing. I had kind of the same feeling like when I listened to Duke Ellington's thing when I was like 8 or 9 years old. I was like blown away, I was like, what, God, how can you play an instrument like the piano like this, And at the time it was, I mean, at the time, I'm talking about the early 90s. It was much more complicated for us to get to access this kind of thing. I mean, either you had the LP at home, or you had the chance, you were in a city big enough that had a Mediatek, where you could rent those things or, loan those albums. And that's what I did. That's when I was in college, and I was going every week, getting everything I could and listening to as much as I could. And so the first years were mostly this, listening to stuff and barely playing, but trying to figure out, what is, what's going on.
So at this time at college, wrapping up college and deciding you wanted to be a musician. Now, then you went to conservatory in Paris to study composition, correct?
So that was not conservatory, because I had actually no access to conservatory because I didn't have any background. And in France, I don't know how it is in the States, but in France it's very, they have a good system, but it's very much like you start as a child, you get all your prize, and then that gives you access to the further thing, but you don't access things if you don't have those, beginning class. And I was really beginning. So the only place where they would accept me was it was a school called SIM, Center of Musical Information, and it was a famous jazz school where people like Michel Petrucciani, Eddie Lewis would hang, and probably Dexter and probably some other people like that.
So they had good wine, is what you're saying.
I can imagine. I remember they had a bar, but but probably I'm not so sure. But anyway, so that's where I study orchestration and arranging. I did 2 years over there, and it really opened up my ears and my ideas about sounds and stuff like this. It didn't do too much about my piano practice, but
Well, we met yesterday for the first time, and I've seen some things online, but we've gotten a chance to play a little bit. And
Yeah.
clearly, I mean, you have tremendous technique on the piano. So at some point, you must have studied with somebody to get some technique on piano. Yes? No?
okay, I study after those 2 years. I did a few lessons. I took a few lessons with a pianist from Bosnia. His name is Bojan Sulfikarpasic. I don't know if you ever heard. He's a fantastic musician, and he gave me some direction pretty much. Because I didn't see him that much, but he gave me direction. He gave me also direction in stuff to listen to, and oh, you like this? Maybe the regular thing. Maybe check this album or check this one. Phrasing, you should work on that, or you should. But there was no direction in terms of technical stuff on the piano. But pretty much, he was adamant about, okay, you have to spend some time. I mean, it won't come like this. You really have to be dedicated. You have to, you have to spend some time. You have to transcribe. You have to listen to as much as you can. You have to practice your instrument every day, even if it's a little bit. But you have to keep this. It was not a problem because at that time I decided that that's what I wanted to do. So I pretty much for a few years I would say I practiced and was into music 8 hours or 9 hours a day. The time I really started to practice seriously the instrument was when my wife got a job in the States. She's American, but she worked for the military, and she got a job in Huntsville, Alabama. That was 2003, so that was like 10 years after I started, practicing and playing. I was already playing, and I had some gigs going on and some good stuff going on already. But when I was there, I had nothing to do. So no, but I was there about half of the year, but like a month at a time or something like this. And I would have access to the university where they had practice booth, and I would literally spend my entire week in the practice booth, working out whatever I could. And I think that's where I really practiced. That's the time I really practice. I never had since a problem to practice. I still do practice to this day, but that was the needed practice of like every musician I have at one point. A few years where you just go heavy on it to pass this little plateau.
Well, aside from the technical aspect of things and learning composition in school, did you ever study beyond that music theory and things of that nature, or is that just how did that come about? Because clearly you know what you're doing. So
hopefully I know some of some of it. The music theory. The funny part, before starting to practice my instrument, in France at the time we had mandatory military. So I finished my exactly. I finished my university, college year. And I had to serve for 1 year, and I was lucky enough to end up in like filming, like propaganda, military filming, whatever thing. But I was in a studio, so I was in charge of the sound, and I could pretty much do what I wanted, except when we had to film or be outside, to do those little videos and thing. But I had a studio, so I was there all day long. I remember buying a couple of harmony book, you know, and checking out, listening to. They were listing some stuff to listen to. I was listening to this stuff, checking out the books. So I spent countless hours during my military training trying to get that in, you know. And I remember because we had even guard duty, and yes, and I remember singing intervals and singing scales and doing things like this, you know, which is and now I think about it, I'm like, this.
This is a good selling point for the French Legionnaires. If you want to become a Legionnaire and study theory, you're on it. Oh, very cool, very cool. So, when you went to Alabama, was there much of a music scene or people to interact with when you were there?
There was a little scene. There was not a big scene. There was a little scene. I got to play regularly with a good friend now, a bass player named Dever Pride. That's over there in Huntsville, and we had a trio with this drummer Steve Ellington. I don't know if you heard of him. And the funny part is same thing. He's one of the first. Those are two are the first person I met when I went there. I spent a week. My wife was there. I had no instrument, nothing. So you can imagine after a week, I was like just. She was like, okay, I found there's a jam session in town. I'm taking you there, you know. And they were the rhythm section from the jam session. I saw Steve 10 years earlier in France playing with Michel Petrucciani because he used to be in his trio. So I was like, is it this? And you know, so it was a nice meeting, and I found out later on that he had recorded and played with the Hampton House, you know, Dave Holland, people like that. And he retired like a lot of jazz musicians, you know. And I don't know if he was originally from Alabama, but he was living in I think Selma, and later on I met Cleveland Eaton, this bass player that used to play with Basie Big Band for 20 some years, and I was doing a regular gig, like a couple of times a week. That was in Birmingham, Alabama, and that was I really enjoyed it because it was, you know, playing just standard, playing by ear mostly, and he was calling the tunes and just hang on and hanging there, you know. And so those were nice, but of course in terms of jazz, the scene I think is pretty small, yeah.
Well, so then you're in Alabama, and then from there, did you head back to France, or where was the next stopping point?
I mean, my wife lived there full time, and I was going back and forth because I was in France and I was playing. I already had the gig with this guitar player, Bireli Lagrene, and so I had some nice stuff going on in France. So I was doing those things, but somehow it was nice because it was giving me opportunity to, when I was here, I tried to with the agency of Bireli and other artists that I was playing with, I was trying to organize so that I would not miss so much when I was over there, but then I would have time to practice and check out things. You know how it is, and the rest of the time when I was coming back to France, I was on the road mostly, so no time to practice, just going out gigging. So somehow the balance was nice, you know.
Well, so you're going back and forth, and I'm assuming when you're back in the States, you're playing some gigs here too with people. When you're back with folks that you know here in a smaller scene.
Yeah, but like for example, I haven't been here since now. It's the first time since 2019. You know, end of 2019, and so I haven't been doing anything since then. You know, but hopefully it picks back up. You know.
I have a question about your experiences playing in the United States and your experiences playing in Europe. Obviously, you grew up there too. So, and we spoke about this a little bit yesterday, but now since we're filming on camera and everyone knows, but European audiences versus audiences in the United States, and I'm not knocking one or the other, but they're different, and it seems like there's more of a level of appreciation from audiences in Europe than there are here. Not that they don't like it, but it just seems different. And I've talked to lots of different artists about this, but I'm just curious your opinions about this.
Okay, personally, I like both. I think that the main difference is, for me, is in Europe, mostly if you go see a concert, you go see a concert. It's not part of live music in a bar or live music for entertainment or, you know. which is not a bad thing. But I'm saying that's okay. So people buy a ticket and they go to see a concert, and they might have a background, they might know something about the artist, and they will sit and listen and appreciate. Or where here I have the impression that there's more opportunities to play, background thing, or little gigs here and there. People are eating, but which doesn't take anything on the music, And I do like both, because somehow in Europe we are missing opportunities to play. So it's because it's so I think it's so inclined to present music in the best way possible, and this is good, but it limits the opportunities to play, opportunities and the places where it can happen,
Can you talk a little bit, and I've spoken with some of my other friends that are from France, about remittance and how that works with artists and venues and all of that?
What is remittance?
Where venues get paid money from the government to present? I don't know all the ins and outs of it. But
Okay, so it's not, the venues are not getting money. So that's not that. It's actually, I mean, yes, they can get a little bit of money, but mostly it's the musicians are getting money. But the thing is that, and I've been part of the system since '97. To be part of the system, you have to do a number of gigs, which are official gigs, which are gigs that are being, and declare and so on and so forth, and which is not so easy. For example, there's a lot of I mean, nowadays they're trying to declare gigs in France pretty much everywhere. But when I started, most of the places like bars, little club, didn't have the means to do that. Because what it is basically, if I play a $100 gig in France, if it's declared, it costs $200 to the place that where I'm playing. So that's what it is basically. And this $100 extra is for the tax, for the healthcare, for all the good stuff actually, for the protection of the musician. It's also a protection for the place where you play. In case anything happens, you're covered basically. But it's more money, and there's a minimum amount, which means that it's around $100. That's the minimum amount, which is a lot of money for a small place. Right. If you have a little bar and you have a quartet, that means the guy's gonna need to have $800 to pay, for music, which is.
Yeah, but if you play solo piano, that's why there's so many great piano players over there.
Yeah, of course that will work like this. So now they have a new thing that goes on, which is some of those little bars that do a certain amount of concert, but not like every week, but they do a certain amount of concert, can get a help from the government. That's what you were talking about, and get a certain amount of money that's paid. Like for example, if they pay you a salary of $100, they will get maybe $60 or $70 for the rest for the tax and all this that will be subsidized by the government. But not every place do that, and the system itself. The system is I find it good, but it's also, you're basically running after gigs that are declared to stay in the system. The system has to be renewed every year. You're being part of the system has to be renewed every year.
So I guess it's kind of like akin to, they have the union over here, which back in the day had a lot more weight than it does now, and it's not knocking the union, but I mean it's kind of like a Wild West in terms of booking gigs. It's very but back in the day, it's like you had to have a union card, and there were union clubs, and if you weren't part of the union, you couldn't gig in these places. It's not so much like that anymore, but it sounds like this is much more organized, and it's everyone is covered because they're getting the health care and all the benefits from that. So I mean, every country has his system, and it has its pluses and minuses, but this sounds pretty good in theory.
It's a better solution when you're part of it, but it's still many musicians that cannot be part of it, or that are not part of it because they don't have enough gigs. Basically, you need 43 of these declared gigs a year, which seems not a lot, but trust me, it's quite a lot when you need to find them, and when you're not playing, for example, with an artist that, I mean, especially in what we do in jazz, if you're not playing with an artist that's touring, or it's quite complicated to get those gigs, to get this amount of gigs. So there's a lot of musicians that are basically making it like here. They end up at the end of the year having only maybe half of the needed gigs. So they get maybe a right for the healthcare, let's say, but they don't get any money from the States, So they still have to teach, or still have to do a lot of other things on the side. So a lot of musicians are not part of the system because of that.
Do you think in the future that might change, or who knows? I mean, that's hard to gauge.
I mean, who knows? Yeah. The thing that has been put in place under President François Mitterrand, and there was his Ministry of Culture, Jacques Lang. He put this in place in the 80s. I think it was I would say very early 80s. So it's been in place for quite a while, but every other year they talk about terminating the system because it's supposedly costs too much money, which is not, because it's pretty much self-sustaining, But I think, like everywhere else, I mean, especially in terms of in times like the time we're in right now, culture is always like, the least of the problem, I would imagine,
Yes, although I would say in Europe it seems like there's way more support for culture than there is here.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't have any answers. These are just my opinions, but I live in it day to day. But I didn't want to bring you here to talk about policy and legislation. I want to talk about you. So, can you talk about your association with Bireli Lagrene? How did that come about?
So, Bireli Lagrene comes from the same region, pretty much. Like he's also in the east of France, more in Alsace, and I'm in Lorraine, but it's like, 30 miles apart or something like this, And of course, you can imagine any musician that grew up in this area, grew up knowing this guy. I mean, I would say especially 30 years ago, I mean, the first little gigs I was doing, everybody was talking about him, and, oh, look, have you heard this guy? Have you heard Bireli? And he would show up to some of our gigs, Like we would play small gigs here and there, and he would just pop up and sometime, jam with us or things like this. And so I knew him. As beginning musician, I knew him. And one day a friend of mine, a guitar player, had a duo concert with him. And I think he didn't feel up to the task. So he was like, hey, don't you want to join us, so at least I'm not alone on the gig. And I met him and played with him on this gig. And that was in 97. Was in a little club, nice place, and the gig went really well. And a few months later, I got a call from him, and like what one of those things, where he was like, "Hey, what you doing this summer?" Nothing. Would you be free for touring? Yeah.
You got to book 43 gigs, so.
And so it pretty much sounded like this. And that was in 98, and I've been playing since with him, but so it was really busy the first 2-3 years, and then he put up a gypsy thing together, like the Gypsy Project it was called. This thing became famous worldwide, and they toured a lot. But of course, as a gypsy project, there was no more piano in it, So every now and then there would be some gigs, here and there, and we kept in touch, of course. And in 2011, he decided to do a new quartet with organ this time, like more electric, more bluesish, and he asked me to play, and we recorded an album, and we toured for a few years, and then went back like 4 years later or 5 years later back to the gypsy thing. But I think it's what it's been doing is, I mean, it does both things so well that, and he has a huge crowd that's following him for the gypsy thing. So I think he always goes back to that too, But hopefully some new thing will come up with him. We did a little tour last year with something that he calls a new quartet, with a French drummer Raphaël Panier and a bass player William Brunard. And this quartet should be on the road soon, hopefully. So hopefully, and yeah, I'm looking forward. Because it's been many years of amazing time and music. I don't know if you're familiar with his playing or with his music. Okay, I mean he's one of these. He's a monster musician. I mean he's really. It's just an honor to just share the stage. It's one of those things where you just okay. I'm here, it's enough, kind of, But of course, through the years, it's a real fantastic learning experience too, to be able to play with somebody of this caliber, But
Well, I'm curious. So you mentioned the organ, and I'm glad you did because I completely forgot about that because we've been doing piano stuff. But so when did the organ come into your toolbox of things that you're able to do? How did that happen?
I would say a good 20 years ago started. Let's say it came in place because I played with a lot of guitar players, mostly quartet, like piano and guitar and bass and drums. And most of the guitarists in jazz want at one point to do like, hey, we should do an organ trio,
Make more money that way.
Yeah, make more money, but it's also the sound, It's like a traditional sound of this organ trio. So a lot of them push me actually. Hey, man, just get yourself a clone, one of those little, and it started like this. So at first it was more like, okay, I just play what I play on the piano, on the organ, and until you figure out that that's not what's working, and yeah. But so through the years, it took me a while to get accustomed to the instrument and to like it and to feel as comfortable as I would feel playing the piano. Piano is still my first instrument, but I really like both. I like both. I like playing the organ if I have to play the bass. If I don't play the bass, I don't like to play the organ. So I guess it's this bass connection with the drums, where you kind of in charge. It makes it a bit more. I mean, you might have to have a bit more consistency, or not consistency, but you can't lay off. When you play piano or you play guitar, you play saxophone. At one point, you can just, with this thing, you can't because you're like you're always the base, the foundation of everything. So it kind of have to. So I think it's a different mindset, and I like it. I like the fact that suddenly, it's more about. You have to be consistent, and you have to be there all the time, and it's not so much about what I'm gonna play that's gonna be so interesting, it's more okay, you have to have it going. It needs to be going for the other ones that are in front and playing, which I really like this role too.
Well, I'm fairly certain of what you're probably going to say, but I'm curious, when you started with organ, who were some of the folks that you started checking out? Like, who were some influences for you on organ?
So okay, at first I would say Larry Goldings first, really, and I mean still to this day. Right now he's in tour in Europe, and he's actually nearby. He played in Mainz where I teach some days ago, and I was like, oh man, I just picked these 2 weeks, and I won't be able to.
He was just here. He was just here.
here?
Like I think the last week or the week before playing, he was here and then in Portland, and I
Okay.
couldn't go to any of it. I wish I could, but
Wow.
yeah.
And this trio. So I think it's him playing organ, but it's also this trio with Peter Bernstein and Bill Stewart. And I think probably for your generation as well, for our generation, it's probably one of those modern trio that still incorporate a lot of tradition and understanding of tradition and every aspect of this music.
Well, those guys have been playing together for a long time.
Exactly. So it's almost like you go to a living, you're at home and in your living room, but it's fantastic music. It's always fantastic. So there was him, Larry Young, which I really love still to this day. I mean, maybe because it was a different. At the beginning I was not so much funnily into. I would say the real organist, like Jimmy Smith or at first, I got to learn and to and to appreciate them. And now I mean, it's like those guys are monster musician, you know. But it's just I would say from a sound perspective, I was more drawn at first by, I would say Larry Young. I really liked Don Patterson too. Yeah.
I'm a study stit junkie, so all the stuff here, that's all.
And so, and I was talking about Don Patterson the other day because of Sonny Stitt, and I also then later on, because I like very much Gene Hammonds, and I got to Jack McDuff through Gene Hammonds, and not the other way around. You know what I mean? It's like I listened to some Gene Hammonds thing that I loved, and I was like, oh, who's playing organ, and what is, you know? And so, like with piano, little by little it grows, and you have other people that you listen to, and but I would say this was the start, of course, and of course later on Joey D and people like this that were more modernist version of all those things combined. But in his case, I think this guy was a bit like the Art Tatum of organ. So it's a thing like you just try to I mean you try to you just try to infuse some of the feel and some of the this perspective he has on music, but it's also in terms of knowing your instrument and technical ability. It's so far out that it's but I guess it's good to look up to to things like this.
Well, it's getting close to that time of the interview where we open things up for questions, and I always forget to mention this at the beginning, but if you have any questions at this time for Jean-Yves or myself, please feel free to put them in the comments, and we will do our best to get to them. So actually, hang on one second.
All right.
Okay, so any questions so far? No questions. If you have questions, put them in. And even if you don't get them to us while we're doing this live, if you have questions after the fact, you can put them in, and we'll do our best to get to them as we can within our insanely busy schedules. So, all right. So now, currently, well, not talking about COVID, but you're splitting your time back and forth between Europe and the U.S. How much of the time of the year are you working in Europe? And is this with mostly?
Oh no, I'm right now. I would say mostly in Europe right now. I came here pretty much only 2 weeks to visit the family. That's pretty much what it was. Hopefully some stuff will start back. But yeah, I'm pretty much playing in Europe. Being on the border, I play a lot in Germany. I have this long-time relationship with a fantastic club in Frankfurt, Germany, the Jazz Keller. And the Jazz Keller's former owner, Eugen Ahn, passed away 2 years ago now, and his son took over the place, and the place is still going, and it's fantastic. So I play regularly there with a really nice saxophonist that you might have heard of. Tony Lakatos is like a Hungarian saxophonist that's been living in Germany. And so that's a monthly gig, and then a bunch of things around.
So aside from that, do you have like a regular, like your group that you play and book? I mean, you're doing sideband stuff, but your own regular stuff. I mean, there's the monthly, and what else you got going on?
Yes and no. I book about 10 gigs a year under my name. No, that's about really. I mean, under my name. Let's say playing trio or quartet, and that's about it. I've been working mostly as a sideman, so I don't know if it's just lazy to wait for the for the phone to ring and get those gigs, and it's just been like this. It started like this, and it's been working pretty well. So I guess it keeps me in a kind of a lazy zone where in terms of booking. But yeah, so this is pretty much what's happening. Yeah?
I could hog the show with more questions, and I will if more questions don't come in, but it looks like there's a question that's come in. What do we got? So the question is, you mentioned your mother played piano. Did she teach you piano at all?
Well, she didn't teach me per se, but we would sit down at the piano, and she would play something, and I would play something with her. you know. So it was like some kind of improvisation, maybe more classically based, let's say, because she didn't have any jazz background, or, you know, but she would play something and I would, you know, just play with her, you know, that, but not real teaching, not, okay, put your hand like this or do that, or, you know, just playing a bit, you know. But I would just add that my grandma played and was a good improviser, but in also more in a classical way. You know, like you had those classical salon and thing in Europe where people would play some classical music, but there would be some improvisation also. And so she could do that, you know. So maybe it was also this thing that I, you know, heard as a kid, or, you know.
Have you seen that video? It's like late Nina Simone where she sits down and starts playing. I can't remember the tune, but it's like it's this going on almost like this the classical thing, and she's just amazing. It's amazing.
But she was classically trained.
Yes,
I mean, she
very
could have
much
been,
so.
She could have been
Yeah.
a concertist, I think, yeah. Yeah.
I'll find it. I'll send it to you. Other questions? So, what was it like taking classes on orchestration and arranging without having strong foundations in music prior to that?
Well, I guess it was just, it was harder in terms of technicality because I had to figure out, oh, what note is that, which note is this, and of course, but it still brought me a lot in terms of sounds and harmonic colors, and what is this specific color, what is that. Then the translation of it on the chart, on the written part of it was maybe the hardest part for me, because I really would have to go line by line to figure out, because my reading skills, of course, obviously back then were pretty pretty bad. Not that they're that good now, but
We'll find out very soon.
oh no.
All right, other questions? That's it for
Okay.
now. Okay, well, yeah, if you have more questions, great questions, keep them coming, please. I'll stall for time. All right, so so you mentioned teaching. So how much teaching do you do throughout the year now? Is it more through a school, or do you do private lessons, or what do you got going on?
I teach now since about 10 years, in a little bit less than 10 years, but in University of Mainz, Germany. And that's about a day every other week. That's about it. So I keep the teaching to a minimum, but on the other hand, it brought me a lot because I got you know, nice students, and it got me also to put, again, because of being self-taught. When we live for a while in Germany after the period of time in the States, and the university contacted me to come and teach. And I first refused because I was scared to death to teach, because I was self-taught, and I thought I wouldn't be able to teach. Simply, you know. And they called me back, you know, like a week later. Have you thought about it? And I did think a lot about it, and I accepted it. And I think that was one of the best things I decided to do, because I was so able to clarify a lot of the stuff that I was doing, but that I couldn't explain, and then also to be able to pass them on, you know. And right now I really feel at a nice balance with that. Where at first I felt like I don't belong, or you know, because I didn't go through the school system, you know, for that matter, you know.
Are there other in the school where you teach? Are there other musicians that you enjoy working with that are good players? Or?
So there are only very good players in this program. And in terms of piano, actually, there's a German pianist of the name of Sebastian Sternal. He's running the jazz department over there. He's a phenomenal pianist, composer, arranger, and he's one of the youngest that became a professor in Germany at age of 28 or something like this. And there's this other phenomenal pianist that's name is Pablo Held. I don't know if you heard of him. He recorded with Scofield, and toured with many artists, and so I feel honored to be among guys like that, you know, that are, you know, that good. And actually they picked they pick the whole team of teacher are players. So their perspective on the thing is already a perspective of playing and of a real life musician playing, and which makes it interesting, and it also makes it easier for me to deal with, because it's not like administrative or anything like this. It's like you have to teach, you have to do a certain amount of hours, but basically you organize it with your student as you wish, as long as they get what they need. And as you get involved, of course, you have to be involved in your teaching, of course. But uh, for example, I never got the chance to teach in France because I was never in the conservatory. Um, uh, in conservatory, so I didn't have the right diplomas to teach. But I see with my friends that do teach in conservatory that it's much more strict in an administrative point of view. And I don't think it necessarily fit what we do, but I know that's how it is. And in this case, in this university in Mainz, it's very good for that. It's very organic and it's very.
I'm glad to hear that. I mean, I've talked to many different artists about this, either on camera or a lot of things off camera. The people have been involved. I mean, I taught at a college for 10 years, and I've got a ton of my own horror stories. But I think colleges here in the United States, it's much more about making money and making money off the backs of students than actually teaching students. Unfortunately, that's the way it's become. And a lot of times they will hire instructors that look good on paper, like, oh, I've got a doctorate in jazz and this and that, but when you have them actually play, it's like, clearly there's something wrong here.
Okay.
But then they're put in these positions to teach, and then students are coming and they're getting not really a true impression of the real skill sets. Yeah, and that's, I think, I don't know, it's a problem. It's a problem.
And see, maybe this difference is important. There's an important difference because mostly in Europe you don't pay for. I mean, you pay. You have like the inscription. How do you say, not registration fees and things like this, but you don't pay. Basically, you have to do a test. You have to do a selection, an audition, and to see your skills, and so you're being picked on your skills, and then it's free. I mean, then it's free, but of course you have to work, and so on and so forth. So the money in place, and of course also as a teacher, I don't know how it is here, but as a teacher, you don't make a lot of money. You make a steady money, but it's not a lot. So it's really pretty much for the sake of teaching and for the passion and the love of the music.
Well, I'm happy to hear that. Don't blow it. Don't blow it. All right. Well, we've got about 5 minutes left. So usually, what I like to do is ask every artist the same question, and it's here you are in 2023, and you've had all these experiences that are unique to your career. If someone was coming to you and saying, Jean-Yves, I'm thinking about becoming a musician, what are some things that you found personally helpful for you and your growth and development that you think are important and that you would pass on to people?
Well, I would say, as a jazz musician, you mean? Or
Whatever.
musician,
Whatever.
I would say, okay, on a personal thing, I would say, try to keep the passion alive. Try to always, as much as possible, stay in the zone that made you like music. Like, I guess we all have those moments where it's a bit down, or what am I doing? Now I spent 20 years doing this. Try to always, when you feel a little bit down, get back to this place where that made you love this thing, or made you get passionate about it. That's one thing. That's the personal thing.
In music and in marriage is what we're talking about here, right?
So somehow, yes. And the other thing is much more practical, I would say. Depending on the instrument that you're playing, I see too much people getting very artsy with what they're doing, which is great. It's fantastic. I mean, that's your skill, that your own development and all that. But also put your ego on the side and try to know what is your role as a musician. If you're a pianist, if you're a good composer, I think we talked about this yesterday. If you're a good composer and you're a pianist, you will get a lot of work. nobody will hire you because you're killing it, but you can't cope, or suddenly you play the wrong chords when it's not up you have to like that. You have to, if you're a pianist, you have to like that. If you're a guitar player, same thing. I mean, you have to develop your skill as a soloist, obviously, as well. Um, if you're a bassist, you have to play the right notes. You have to play. You have to be able to walk. You have to be able to have good time. So all those skills will help you work. And the tendency, I think, also with school is actually to make it sometimes too much artistic. And I think the artistic part will come anyway because of the passion, the thing you're listening to, the thing you're drawn to. But you need to know your skills. You need to know, your place in the music, and your role as a musician. And if you go according to that, and if you're a good human being, also in general, I mean, no, that goes a long way in helping you getting some work and staying on track in terms of work, in terms of making a living as a musician.
Excellent advice. Any other questions before we wrap up? Okay, if you have questions and you've missed it after the fact, like I said, put it in the comments and we'll do our best to address it. Before we wrap up, number one, thank you for joining us wherever you are, whatever time it is. And again, we do this every single week. We have a different guest artist, interview, performance, original compositions. If you find value in the work that we're doing, feel free to make a donation. You can do that online either via Venmo or PayPal or mailing a check, and all that information is at the beginning of this post. We're going to take a short break here, and then we're going to do a brief sound check and do our concert. Jean-Yves has some music. I've got some music we'll put together and play. And then we've got another concert with Jean-Yves coming up March 5th. We'll be performing at McMiniman's here in Tacoma at the Spanish Ballroom. The first set, we'll do a set of music, and then it'll be a jam session, so come play. Thank you to our sponsors. Of course, that's Ted Brown Music, KNKX, Tacoma Creates, Titus Will Cars, Edward Jones, financial consultant Rick Gray, and all of you guys for just watching and participating and hanging out with us. We appreciate it. Jean-Yves, thank you so much for being here. It's been a pleasure barraging you with questions. So glad you're such a good sport. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Karim, for having me. It was a
all
pleasure.
right. We're going to take a short break. We'll be right back. Thank you so much.